Michael with United Veterans Worldwide, excited to meet with my new friend Caroline today. She and I got in contact with each other in the last couple of months. She and her husband moved into this area. He's got an incredible beard, puts mine to shame, um, and just a great couple. And found out by accident almost that she was involved in some incredible holistic help for women. And I'll have her kind of share that part of the journey. But I want to introduce Caroline to you today. And Caroline, will you tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me on. I work with women's hormones, cycles, fertility. Really, it's all under the same umbrella. And a lot of times we're kind of taken aback, like, oh, that's kind of unique. And how I got into it is just my own story of struggling with my hormones and my period for a long time. Um, and not really finding any answers for several years and trying to go to different experts and things, and ended up finding actually a podcast somewhere, and things kind of spiraled from there. And I realized that there's so much out there, especially about women's hormones, that is just not common knowledge, but really should be. It's really the basic, and so integrated with like women's overall health and wellness. It impacts mental health, physical health, digestion, metabolism, just like I said, every single aspect of health is impacted by hormones and cycles. So yeah, I'm really excited to dive in more and get into it today.
Yeah, yeah. This is a new one for this channel, and I really was excited to share this because of the growing women audience of my subscribers, and I think it's right now at about 40% of my total subscribers are females, and this is globally. So we're talking to an audience today who may tune in who are located in Asia, the Middle East, South America, and then we have a smaller population in the US and Canada who will tune in today to hear this message. And so some of these concepts of hormone awareness may be new, but it might also really register with some of our female audience members today to really recognize that there are other ways we can track and find the root cause of some of our discomfort, pain. Um, so let's take you back in time for a minute, Caroline, and let's talk through the physical challenges that you first started to notice as a part of this. And what I love about this topic and this openness, Caroline, is that some of this stuff has been taboo to discuss openly for a long time. And that's not so different from what we talk when we talk about men's mental health. It's been taboo. It's like, oh, it makes you weaker. But as a warrior who sits here and does this podcast, um, I openly talk, openly share, openly do emotion because we want to break those barriers down that show that strength is not tied to those things that we've locked behind closed doors. Now it's time to open it up and really find healing. So I'm so glad to have you on. Walk us back in time a little bit when you started to recognize some of these things and what it looked like, what it felt like.
Yeah, and even just touching on what you said about like the openness, I've always been a very, very private person.
Mm,
um, and so, especially talking about like, periods and all that is so laughable compared to like 10 years ago. And so it's almost kind of funny to look back on and see now about how open I am about sharing, especially like my story and experience. But I just, like you said, it's someone needs to be the one to share and to open that up and kind of crack it. And that's like those stories can be so powerful and sometimes the best way that we can learn. So
yeah.
yeah, with my story, it started when I was probably, I don't know, probably 14, 15, sometime in there. I started having really painful periods and it would get a little bit worse every cycle. And so it was like, I know people like, period cramps are pretty common, but I'm talking like it got to the point where one day as a sophomore in high school, it went within a matter of literally 5 minutes, like passing period in between classes. I was throwing up and almost passed out, shaking, and just, it was like, and just such extreme pain. Like I'd never
How
felt
scary.
before being close. Yeah. So that was, really intense. Thankfully it was the one day of the week that we had a school nurse, just, great timing there. My parents are also both first responders, so they hurry over to the school and they're getting me in the car. And and even then the school nurse is like, "Are you sure you don't want to call an ambulance?" So we get over to urgent care, and by the time we actually get in to see the doctor, which is maybe 20 minutes, I could, having a conversation. I'm like tired, but like feel fine. I was like, you would not believe that 15 minutes ago I was like dying, pretty much. It was really, really bad. And talked to a couple doctors, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's kind of weird," but they gave me birth control and said that would help. And I ended up being on that for about 6 years, and now there's so much. I have mixed feelings looking back, because that really it didn't help. That's a really common myth about like hormonal birth control, is that I'd say, I don't know the exact numbers, but very, very commonly it's prescribed for things not related to like preventing pregnancy. It's prescribed for like acne, mental health things. It's claims like, oh, it'll balance your hormones and like fix everything. It doesn't fix anything. It just hides it. It just shuts the whole system down. So yeah, I didn't have painful periods for 6 years, but it's because that entire system was just not working. And it always bothered me, because I always want to know, okay, but like what's actually happening? I don't want to just ignore this. How is this going to impact my future? Starting a family one day, all those big questions. And I kept going to doctors, and they kept saying, "Oh, that's kind of weird. That's really weird. I've never heard of that before." And so not only was it, the mystery, but then going to these experts and being told that, "Oh, that's weird. I've never heard of this." And then that was it. Like there was no follow up. And eventually I started pushing more of like, okay, so where do I go from here? Like, what do I do next? Is there, another specialist I could see? Do you know someone who knows more about this? If you don't, like it's okay if you don't know. Not everyone has to be the expert in everything, but at least point me in the right direction. And it was just dead end after dead end after dead end. And I was like, am I the only one that goes through this? Like maybe it's just me,
Yeah.
So, and then all during that whole time, of course, prayer and faith was a huge part of it. And it just was like, okay, not yet. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. Like, it's okay. And God really does have a plan. This is like one of my huge testaments to that in my life.
Yeah.
And it was literally like 2 weeks after my husband and I got married a few years ago, that I found this podcast where someone was explaining, hey, here's how hormones work. Here's how, the female body works, and how you can heal a lot of these really common problems like PCOS or endometriosis, those sort of things.
Can you heal endometriosis?
Mm-hmm, totally.
Really?
I know several.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's new for me.
Yep. So
Yeah.
I think there are very, very few things, even like when it comes to women's health, especially, that cannot be healed and reversed. So it's fascinating. And so I hear this, and of course it blows my mind. And she talks a little about like, the birth control pill and how that impacts hormones, and the difference between like having a natural cycle versus taking the pill, which also other forms of birth control, like the IUD, implant, things like that. It's the same mechanism, just a different delivery system. So the pill's just the most common. But and so I was like, wow, I wonder if I could heal my body. I wonder if I could, figure that out like in my own journey. And so I quit the pill pretty much cold turkey within like a week, and was like, okay, like just gonna go for it and see where my body's at, see how my body responds.
Did you feel a tank in energy and all of that when you went cold turkey?
I feel like it was a huge, like there wasn't anything like super immediate, but I'd say within a couple months, I noticed a huge shift in like my mental health. I feel like a lot of people are like, man, I got my personality back. I went on it when I was 15, so I don't really know if I figured out my personality to begin with. And just, how that impacted like my growth through like, being a teenager and young adulthood. And it was like just everything came back online, like mentally, physically, and definitely had like a wave of symptoms coming back off of it, because there's also a lot of withdrawal symptoms now on top of everything that had been suppressed for years. But really made a lot of changes to nutrition primarily, and just continue to dive into learning about, okay, how do these hormones work? When is what happening? And that just continued to spiral and started sharing about it. Cause now I'm like, I can't help but shout it from the rooftops. Cause like other people have got to know about this. Like
Yep.
this is not taught, in schools, it's not taught in like really like how people supposed to pass this on to their children if they don't even know it. And doctors are not really educating on this either. And if anything, like the topic of hormones and things is very like scientific and it's not really applicable. It's more like textbook, here's how it works, but not this is how it impacts your everyday life.
Yep.
So that's been a huge drive for me of like, no, this is the foundation of how you see the world, how you interact with the world. That's more than just information, like that is a huge, huge part of life and living life. So about 7 or 8 months after going off birth control and starting to heal and work on that, I had my first completely pain-free period, like zero cramping, no pain. Like I was up, like it's still normal to feel more tired and like relaxed and all that, but I had no like terrible symptoms. And I was just it's actually on my birthday. I say it was God's birthday present to me. It was great. Best birthday present.
Yeah.
But it was so amazing to me. I was like, wow. Cause I was just hoping for it to not be like as bad, I was like, but to have like completely pain-free, like after how bad it was before, was just so miraculous and just more of a testament of like, I've got to keep sharing this and I've got to help other people to realize the same is possible for them. So yeah, that's the journey. And that was a couple years ago now. So
talk to me about, you said mental health was affected. In what way did you feel that effect from like 15 on, having those experiences and then having hormones played with by drugs, right?
Yeah, I think there were multiple things. Looking back now, I think this is partly due to going on birth control, as well as like other things happening in life. But I developed chronic pain, in my chronic hip pain, so it's hard to walk around even the house some days. And then like really, really bad brain fog. So I just feel like I could never really fully be alert and awake. Again, things I went to doctors for years about, and they said, "Oh, well, hope it gets better." And if it doesn't, then come back, and then I'll be, say the same thing.
Yeah.
And rinse and repeat. So yeah, I think just that not being able to focus, and now understanding hormonally, like having a cycle, because the way birth control works is just preventing ovulation, and everything centers around that for a woman's cycle, like leading up to it, afterwards. Like that's the reason we have all those hormones working: estrogen, progesterone, even testosterone, FSH, LH, all of it. And so when you prevent that, none of those other hormones need to work. But for women, like that's a huge aspect of where we get like motivation and drive, and even like physical strength will fluctuate. Like I said, metabolism will change, like caloric needs will change. And so like social skills, all of those things are really impacted by estrogen and progesterone. And so not having that, like, and synthetic hormones act very, very differently in the body. So not having that natural estrogen and progesterone, like really, yeah, I can look back and see, oh, okay. And then on top of just like general health of not eating enough, then not really realizing like how big a nutrition really was really, really key in like feeling so tired and fatigued. It was like, I could see like how those, that drug was impacting and like really suppressing my mental state. I don't feel like I had anything, like some people get really bad anxiety and depression, things like that, or like mood swings. I didn't have that, but yeah, I think it just was like everything was dampened for several years. And now like I just feel so much more like see the contrast, and now like how vibrant and like energetic and just like full of life, I guess. I feel of like, wow, like what a stark difference it made. So yeah.
This is incredible. I've only recently gotten into the research for hormones for men, which we know is testosterone. And then you mentioned testosterone for females, and what's interesting in the science behind it is that testosterone, to a certain degree, that begins to change into estrogen,
Mhm.
and then that's why there's this shared commonality between men and women in the hormones, and then it starts to really differ, right? But all of the same symptoms that you start to describe that you started when you were younger and experienced later on are some of the same symptoms that men go through when there's a lack of testosterone production in the body. So recently I went to a urologist who handles the hormone management for men, and said, hey, I'm interested in seeing what additional testosterone will do for my body. And they were excited. They said, we'll help you out, but you got to fall outside of this range. And I was like, really? Okay, so let's do the test. Found out that I was still inside, and they're like, no, we can't help you. You're doing great. I'm like, but I'm not doing great. And part of the reason is like, um, people who go to work today are doing most of their work on computers, and they're sitting stagnant. And that sitting stagnant, being on computers, will eventually lead to lack of mobility, lack of drive. Testosterone production in the body for the man starts to decrease. Now, for a person who's an athlete, as an example, who sits down, does their work, goes and hits the gym multiple times a day, you'll start to see that testosterone start to come back up because the body will recognize that it needs to produce it in order for you to do what you're doing activity-wise. But as we get older, that bump becomes less and less and less. And unless we fall outside of that range for normal medicine, um, we're on our own. And we're just supposed to deal with this decrease of desire, appetite, motivation, energy, mental clarity, all of this stuff. And it just doesn't make sense. Um, so I'm so glad that you bring this to my attention because it applies to both men and women. But as we focus on the women's story today, I can't imagine as a man at 15 years old going to school and having symptoms like that take you down and still have to function all around you, right? It's something that men just don't have to deal with, and it's a special circumstance for girls. Um, you mentioned that once you came off of birth control, which was the solution for modern medicine to tweak your hormones or cut it off, um, you started to feel alive again. You developed your personality. Um, these are so important, and I hope that the ladies who are watching today can really recognize that in their own body, these same type of feelings have existed or currently are existing. So maybe Caroline, you can tell us how you've found a way to fix what modern medicine couldn't do, but holistically you found ways to do it.
I think it kind of goes back to what you were saying about, how are we living nowadays? We're sitting in front of a screen all the time. This is something that I've now, like, as I've really like re-established, okay, what are my values? What do I really want to go towards? Because there's so many voices in the health space, like, do you do cold plunges or do you not? Do you go carnivore? Do you go vegan? Like, there's so many extremes. And I've gotten to a point where I realize it really is just coming back to how are human beings designed to thrive? Like, what's our basic biology? Because people have been, living for, thousands, not hundreds of thousands of years now. We've been around a long time. And you look at, our food industry, our technology, all these things in just the last 150 years, maybe going back 200 years, and so much has radically changed. And then we wonder why, anxiety, depression, fertility struggles, all of these things are on the rise year after year. Testosterone, I know, is just extremely low if you look at the numbers. Like, I think men now have like 50% lower testosterone than old men than 50 years ago or something like that. Like, it's crazy.
It is.
And it's no surprise when you look at how we've taken human beings really out of their natural environment. And so my approach now is just, how do we get back in alignment with like our ancestral biology? And how do we support that, but within a modern context? Like, we're still doing a podcast and people are going to listen to this. Like, we still have technology, we still have chairs and modern things that we live in, but how do we blend the two? And so, like I said, nutrition was a really, really big starting point for me. And realizing how nutrients impacted my body and my hormones, and what nutrients my hormones needed to function at their best. So that really started with like lowering seed oils. I know that's a really popular buzz thing nowadays, but for a reason. Like, they weren't around 200 years ago.
And how do you do that?
Really, we just focus a lot on like animal-based fats, so saturated fats. So like not being afraid of meat, like good quality red meat, or dairy, things like that, and trying to not perfection. It's not about perfection. Is not the name of the game. When I first had my first pain free period, I was finishing up college as a broke newlywed. Like, didn't have all the budget to go out and spend on all the fanciest, nicest foods.
Yep.
And even since then, I've made a lot of improvements in our like groceries and all that. But yeah, just eating locally where we can with fresh fruits and vegetables that are in season. And then, like I said, prioritizing saturated fats over polyunsaturated fats, which I guess if you want to get side note into the little scientific aspect, like with cramps, for example,
yep.
Those are driven by prostaglandins, and there's different kinds of prostaglandins. Some that will like cause the uterus to cramp, some that cause it to we have two that help it relax.
Mm-hmm.
And omega-3s help it to relax, while omega-6s will drive up the inflammation and make it more painful. So switching out to like, maybe more salmon, or like cod liver oil is a supplement that's pretty common to help get those nutrients needed. And like I said, overall, just like eating enough was a really big one for me. I think a lot of women don't realize that they're under eating, even on accident. And there's a lot of symptoms of that, of like how to know like where your metabolism is at. Like, if you're feeling cold all the time, if you're feeling tired, brain fog, like that midday slump, like those are all signs that your body needs a little bit more support. Because going back to I think what I said earlier about how everything revolves around ovulation for women, like the release of an egg, that leading up to ovulation, your body's preparing like the uterine lining. It's preparing and stimulating the follicles and the ovaries to produce hormones. And then after ovulation, then you enter what's called the luteal phase. And that is that's the only time you make progesterone, which is really, really protective for health, for both men and women. And so if you're not ovulating, then you're not making any progesterone. And even if you do, like a lot of women have like weak ovulation. So like an egg is released and you do make some, but then it's not enough to really balance out estrogen. So estrogen and progesterone are very complementary in that sense. And when those get out of whack, that's when you get a lot of symptoms like PMS, period pain, like acne, mood swings, that sort of thing. All the stuff we typically associate with periods. So yeah, when it comes to like resolving those things, I'd say nutrition was huge, and just like I said, prioritizing more like animal-based proteins and fats, and then having a lot of carbs. Carbs are really important, especially for women. I know there's a lot of fear around that, but again, people have been eating carbs and bread for a very, very long time. Quality matters for sure. Like what you find at the store on the shelf when you get a loaf of bread is not going to be what kind of bread people were eating 50, 100 years ago.
Right. Still very processed. Yeah.
Yeah. So very processed, lots of additives, all those things that are going to create more inflammation and more problems. So yeah, I'd say, those would be the two big things. Just really locally eating as much as we can. And in season is really, really key. There's some people may have heard of the term cycle syncing. So basically, it's just like you change how you live and eat throughout your cycle to help support your hormones. Some people take this to the level of they change out what seeds they're eating every week to support, oh, this seed is good for estrogen, this seed is good for progesterone. I don't personally advocate for that because I feel like it's a lot of more mental work. And again, how were people living 1,000 years ago when they had a cycle? They didn't have the luxury of eating pumpkin seeds one week and then sunflower seeds the next
Nope.
year round.
Nope.
They just ate what was around them, what they had access to. And that was usually animals and fruit, and then root vegetables as well. So that's the core. Like, if I could really oversimplify it, that's the core of, like, I'd say, the nutritional aspect. And then other than that, the mental game of, like I said, the cycle syncing thing, of just understanding I'm not designed to be the same every day. Like for men, like everyone has a circadian rhythm. You know, we wake up in the morning, we feel that's when we should feel the most alert, and then kind of wind down throughout the day. But for women, we also have, if you have a cycle, then you have this other rhythm that's, throughout the month, which could be anywhere from, 21 to 34 days, ideally. So like week to week, that's going to fluctuate and change, and being able to understand that is, you look at like a lot of commercials geared towards women, and even like tampon commercials where they're running a marathon, and it's like, no, that's not biologically appropriate.
Right.
And you ask any woman, no one wants to run a marathon that week. So like understanding that, not to override that, but understanding it's like, okay, my body, like I do have different needs, and that does fluctuate, and that's totally normal. And like that's, and so it's normal to feel really like creative and energetic and social and have like really good communication skills one week. And then maybe like 10 days later, it's like, I feel really, don't really want to have anyone over, just for more calm and slow. And then really detail oriented, like really want to get things done. So it's like tapping into that and getting in alignment with that and recognizing those patterns within my own like body and life. That was like, I'd say those two things, the nutrition, and then getting in tune with what those fluctuating hormones felt like in my body, and listening to that rather than trying to like control it and override it, if that makes sense. So yeah.
It's almost like men need to have a map of women's levels so that we can appropriately support the women in our lives. And I have lots of girls, lots of daughters, obviously my wife. And when you're saying these different levels of progression through a month, right, or through the cycle, I see my spouse over and over again through what you were just saying, right? I'm like, oh, right? And it seems like, we're so different. But men have their own rhythm of going through these things, and
everyone's hormonal.
We are, and I'll take bigger dips sometimes. It is what it is. We're all created so that we have to manage those same levels at different points. What an education. So you had your own experience, and then what are you delving into now in terms of your ability and your skill set to help other people?
I'd say now, really understanding more of the intricacies of just hormones and function throughout like a woman's lifetime. So starting with, puberty and what does that look like those first early years, all the way through like perimenopause and menopause, and like that whole gap in between, because that it fluctuates. Even with like pregnancy, that changes obviously hormones a lot. And so it's amazing to me to see how dynamic like women's bodies are and how much they change throughout the course of their life compared to men. It's like, okay, now you've got testosterone, and then it's pretty consistent. There's some slight changes, but not nearly as much as like it is for women.
Yep.
So yeah, diving into that and just like more of the detail, nitty gritty. Like you mentioned how, testosterone could turn into estrogen, like those sort of little things. And really how simple lifestyle changes really impact hormones, like for everyone. And how simple healing really can be. I think a lot of times people think of, if there's anyone listening and they're like, oh, I've got this period problem and like it's this big thing and it might take time. You didn't get here overnight, but that doesn't mean it has to be some crazy specific regimen for healing. So yeah, I'd say just really the simple application of what healing looks like for people, and helping to guide people through that, to first get the education and then apply it. Like that'd be the big thing right now.
Yeah. What I love in this message is that there's hope for people who feel like they're stuck. And it's not unlike everything else we've talked on this channel of a trauma. And this is like a monthly trauma that a woman's body goes through. And if she doesn't understand it, it can be pretty traumatic. It can shut down her life. It can cause relationships to be challenging, just make life difficult. And what we want to do is we want to help everyone get to a place where they're understanding their own physiology, the connection between their gut and their mental health, and trying to help people get on a journey of wellness. And this is a huge topic that is a growing influence in the holistic world. And I wish that regular medicine would catch up, which it sounds funny because guys are paying $150,000, to go to medical school and come out and aren't able to help people like you or me with hormones. And it makes no sense. It's like, what?
Yeah.
I'm not a trained hormone specialist, and yet I have people in town here, a game day, they're nationwide, who work with men's hormones and try to get the testosterone back to the level we need to be at, where we feel good, we get strong, we're able to support our families appropriately, and that's really the place we want to be. You mentioned briefly, and on this channel I encourage a lot of different levers to be pulled: fitness, nutrition, mental, emotional health, making and keeping connections with others, so getting outside of ourselves. Eventually on that journey of healing, we talk about serving in the community, and we also talk a lot about spirituality, and you mentioned that briefly. And for my own journey of coming out of combat suppressed PTSD, I wasn't in a place where I could feel. I'm sure my hormones were all getting jacked at that point. My fight or flight was broken, and so it was releasing extra energy and hormones to always be ready to fight. And it just made life so difficult. And prayer was a huge part of my healing as well. But it wasn't like prayer gave me an answer like this, and suddenly there was a quick fix. No, instead it was like, and you mentioned it, and I wrote it down here. You said, simple lifestyle changes, and I wrote equals success. And
Yep.
and so incremental changes, whether it's spending more time outside, getting the natural light, being grounded, whether it was seeking therapy with emotional and mental challenges, whether it's making connections with other people so I know that I'm not alone, which is a huge part, Caroline, of what your message on your Instagram, as an example, is doing, is putting that message out there that says, if these things resonate with you, look at what I've been able to find as far as healing, and join me on this journey, and let's see if we can't help you get to that same place. And that is such an important aspect of what I feel God wants us to get to. And if no other science can support and help us right now, then it's up to us, Caroline, to make that effort to reach people and pull them into this journey that says there is hope.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you made a comment about coming out of, combat and all that and the stress. I want to make a quick note of, this is where understanding just biology comes, like our own biology and physiology makes such a big difference, because women's bodies respond very, very differently to stress. So it's really fascinating. Even you look at a lot of like popular diets or fitness things, and it is studied on men. And so it's like, oh, like intermittent fasting is a great example, or keto, or these things. And it's, oh, here's the benefits it's shown to have. And all those research studies are done on men and then marketed to everybody, which is so Sometimes it's marketed to just women, which is not how that works. And so I don't know exact like there's a quote that goes around where it's like women are not small men. Like you can't just
Yes.
take what works for a man, scale it down, and then apply it. And so like with stressors, intermittent fasting that introduces some stressors that can be a positive thing. Stressors not always bad, or like cold plunging, that sort of thing. And men's bodies respond really, really well. It can help, like with testosterone levels and all those great benefits. But then for women, the little bit of research that we do have that includes women actually shows the opposite. And so it increases our stress response, and that's going to negatively impact our hormones. So lower progesterone, more cycle problems, and women in high stress environments, especially like really in the fitness industry, since that's a big thing that you talk about here.
Yep.
If you don't have a cycle anymore, like you've lost your period, or it's really irregular, those are just like some really common red flags that, if your body's like, I don't feel safe. So it's something that gets really, really overlooked for women's health. It's like, oh yeah, I just don't have a period anymore, and I haven't for the last 2 years since I started like bodybuilding or whatever it is.
Or women in combat.
Yeah, or in combat, yeah,
And it
those high
stops.
stress environments, which is completely biologically appropriate, for a woman, since the whole system is designed to carry life. It's like, this is not a great time to create life, so we're going to put that entire system on hold. Which again, our bodies are amazing and always responding to our environments, and I'm so grateful that they do that. And those changes are totally normal and a great thing that our bodies are protecting that. But if we ignore it for, I think, too long, then yeah, it can definitely lead to further issues, which is like, again, a really great point to be able to get that out there. And like, how are our bodies impacted by our lifestyle, by our nutrition? Like, what are we communicating to our bodies through what we're doing each and every day, or big life things, and how do we listen to that and then better respond to support it through all these different facets that you mentioned, like fitness? How can we help fitness be supportive? I'm not saying that women should go work out, but there are definitely nuances to like the female physiology versus male physiology, and you can't just call it the same size, one size fits all for everybody. No. Especially when it comes to like those hormonal differences. But
yeah, that's such an important part of education, and it's an area that I don't know enough about, and I'm so glad that you're here to help educate us a little bit. I was doing cold plunges pretty consistently for several months leading into winter, and then about 4 weeks ago I got the flu, and I haven't gone back to it yet. I see it in my garage, and I know that it's going to be like 38 degrees, and I'm like, oh, the start back is a beast.
Yeah, getting started sometimes is, I think, the hardest part. It's just starting and just, yeah.
But the amazing thing that happens, like in a man's body, I can only speak for myself, is that I stay in for 3 minutes. And it's hard. I have to mentally focus, which is great because it gets my mind out of that fog, and it puts me really honed in on just what I'm trying to do right now in the moment, right? Living in the now, which is hard for me to do. It makes me live in the now. I'm cold. I want to get out. I'm going to try to stay. And then when I get out, and I have a video on my channel where I show myself like this after I get out of the cold plunge, and I'm outside in the snow, and my whole body is just red. Everything, all the oxygen's moving to the front of my body to try to help it recover. And what it's doing is it's fast forwarding the process whereby hormones are created and made and produced. And there's suddenly this whole sense of elation that comes over my mind. So if I've struggled with mental health that day, if I've struggled emotionally with the stressors I engage with at work or whatever in family, it's suddenly there's this moment of clarity where everything becomes so clear. And just saying that stuff, I'm like, man, I'm going to have to do it today.
extra little nudge.
I can't talk the talk and not walk it.
Yep.
But it does help some of those areas. So if I had my testosterone checked 6 months ago, or no, maybe 8 months ago, and I was at a certain level, which was probably right here, not where it's too low, where they'll support me in regular medicine, but right here, where they say, oh, that's average, that's great, I don't want to be average. And I started to cold plunge, my level for testosterone moved closer to, or on the greater side of average, right? Not the lower end of average. Not enough for what I want, right? Not enough for what I need, but it did move the needle. So for anybody who's considering cold plunging, do it safely, do your research, look at Andrew Huberman's podcast, get the research done, what it does for men. And again, we can't compare apples to apples with men and women. We're created differently for different functions to support each other, integrated, right? So this is such an important topic. I'm excited, and Caroline will announce, and I will announce in the near future a partnership that we'll have to help women get to a place where they can heal. And Caroline will definitely do some coaching and mentoring and educating to get people to a place where they can start to experience less pain in their regular cycle, which is part of the woman's body, experience greater understanding of their physiology and their mental health. And all of this will be really exciting. So I'm super excited to work with you going forward, Caroline.
Yeah, me too. Really at the end of the day, it just comes down to the fact that, like you said, women and men are not like the same biologically, and how do we work with that? And recognizing, how do we recognize those things, and how healthy we really are, and not just by a broken idea, or even with like the hormone testing for men or for women, there's the normal range and then there's optimal. And really that's why I'm so excited to work with you, is because it really is about how do we get to optimal, not just good enough.
Right.
Or because when it comes to women's health, we are designed for this. We are designed to go through all of these, like I said earlier, all these different changes throughout life. And those things are not just part of being a woman. Oh yeah, well, it's just going to be awful to some extent. It's just, luck of the draw and how bad. But there is hope for healing, and it doesn't have to be some crazy, extreme, big thing. And it can be really, really healing, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. So yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm excited to see where things go in the future.
Heck yes. Thank you very much. And thanks for your advice that I think women will be able to take back. And if men have watched this, which I hope they do, because it's so important to be educated on what your partner is going through so that you can be supportive as well. Both of us need to understand each other better so that our relationships become more in sync and we become one. Caroline, thanks very much for your time today, and I look forward to more interaction in the future, and I hope that we help more people get to a place of wellness as a result.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.